People who know a Cornstar personally, what are they like? A while back, I did some amateur photography for a modeling group, mostly at car shows, anime conventions, and burlesque shows. I was usually just a backup for the main photographer. During this time, I got to know one of the models who lived nearby. She mostly did swimsuit and cosplay modeling. I followed her Instagram, which led me to a second account, and eventually, her OnlyFans. At the time, she was already one of the top 5% creators on OnlyFans and still is, literally a millionaire, using modeling as a fun side hobby. A few years later, I got a job at a grocery store chain and became friends with a coworker who seemed super awkward around one of the managers. When I asked why, he told me he had dated her daughter, whom he met at an anime convention. Yep, same girl. The very next day, guess who walks through the store? She was visiting her mom, and her mom was so proud of how successful her daughter had become with her online clothing business. So, there we are, me and my coworker, trying to act like we didn't recognize her, while she's doing the same. Meanwhile, we're all secretly aware of the fact that we knew exactly what she looked like unclothed, and her mom was completely oblivious to the entire situation. The look on her face when she realized we knew each other was priceless. She turned bright red. It was easily one of the most awkward yet hilarious interactions I've ever had. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I met Jordan Max just out of high school through the local music scene. We used to go to lots of concerts together. She has remained very similar to how she was back then. She's still super into emo music and is a bit desperate to find love. Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to understand how much her career limits her options with the types of men who are interested in her. She thinks all men are terrible because the only type of guys to generally want to date a Cornstar are likely not the highest caliber of dudes. I also know Jenny Rose since. She grew up with a bunch of my friends from Chicago and lived with them in LA before getting into the business. She's super driven and talented in lots of ways. She was running several fairly successful businesses she had started before she got into the industry. Now she seems to be working considerably less and just enjoying. She's also a very talented artist in her spare time. She painted 2 large oil paintings for me that hang behind my living room couch. Story 3. When I was like 18-19, my best friend and I worked in an airport in New York. We helped people with bags and whatnot. This lady, she was blonde, fit, and just noticeably attractive, probably in her late 20s, early 30s. Especially compared to us, both of us were like your typical skinny, pasty-looking teens in oversized waistcoats. She had a lot of bags, and she asked us both if we could help bring her luggage to her car. We had like luggage carts. We were like, of course, and we loaded up and walked with her out to the lot where she was parked. We always make small talk with people. It's like a 5 to 10 minute walk, so we asked them what brings them to town, where they are from, etc. She was so pretty, though it was a pleasure getting to chat with her. She told us that she was flying in from LA. She had a job thing out there, but she lived in NYC. My friends goes, "Oh, LA, I feel like I recognize you from something. Are you like in a movie or TV show?" She blushed and said she gets that a lot. Then she changed the subject and asked us about her job and if it was fun working in an airport. I remember her just being really nice and really pretty. Anyway, as we got to her car, we loaded up all the bags in the SUV and she thanked us both for walking her to her car. It was late, the parking lot is big, so it wasn't uncommon for women to request our services just to not be alone out there, even when they only had one bag. She then gave us each a $50 tip, which was a really big tip. Usually we got like $1 to $5. $10 was a good one. We thanked her, and then my friend said again, "I really do feel like I know you from a TV show or something." She lightly blushed and giggled. Then she gently placed her hand on my friend's shoulder, almost like she was subtly caressing it, and goes, "Well, maybe you have seen me in something, sweetie. I'm a Cornstar." My friend's face turned bright red, like a cherry tomato, and as soon as she drove off, I died laughing at him. It's been years, and we no longer work there, but you best believe whenever we link up, I bring this story up every time, especially if I'm with new friends of his, LOL. Story 4. I met one of my good friends about 5 years ago in a rather unconventional setting, a small group bang. Since then, she's become a star, working with some of the biggest studios. Her manager is this guy whose name I can't quite recall right now, but he's not exactly winning any beauty contests. She's definitely unapologetic about her sexuality. I've known her for a few years now, and while we met in a wild way, she stayed the same person, with no change in sight. The groupie I was invited to, where I first met her, was pretty small, only 5 of us. Everyone had to be tested and cleaned because she insisted on going without protection. Most of these events are straightforward. You do your thing, clean up, and leave. After I was done and cleaned up, I said goodbye to her, and as she was getting banged, she stared me down and said, "You, leave me your number and take mine." I was completely taken aback, especially considering how stunning she is. That marked the start of about 3 years of seeing her at least 2 to 3 times a week. But over time, she became less and less available. At one point, I hadn't heard from her for 6 months. She wasn't much of a texter, just the occasional, "Hey, are you free?" One day, I texted her just to check in, and she replied, "Yeah, I'm good. Let's hang out soon." When we finally met up, I had trouble performing, and she suggested, "Want to see some of my corn?" At first, I thought she meant homemade videos. But when she pulled up her laptop, it was extremely high-quality stuff. I realized this wasn't amateur material. I asked her about it, and she told me she had started doing corn with European companies. Now, a couple of years later, we still talk occasionally, but I've only hooked up with her a handful of times in the past year or two, mostly when she's in town visiting family. Outside of her career, she's surprisingly normal, intelligent, down-to-earth, and not on any drugs. But when it comes to doing it, she has an appetite unlike anyone I've ever known. Story 5. A friend brought her to our dinner at this casual Greek resto, and she was really nice. She brought out her water bottle, and it had the big Cornhub logo on it. Apparently, once you reach a certain number of subscribers, the website management sends you a box of goodies, all with the logo. Dinner went well, and we managed to avoid that topic, but she said, "I know you want to ask questions, it's fine with me." So, we went ahead and asked, and it was one of the rare moments I was starstruck even if I hadn't watched any of her videos before. Thankfully, there were no minors nearby. When we got up to leave, people were approaching her to ask for photos, but she politely refused, saying she's with friends. We've met her a couple of times since, all very vanilla encounters, before anyone asks. Story 6. She left the industry about 11 or 12 years ago and moved back to her small town in rural southern Georgia. Despite donating an incredible amount of her wealth to local charities, the townspeople, especially the women, still ostracize her. When we go out, I have to play the role of her pretend boyfriend, which is amusing since I'm gay, because men constantly approach her, offering $20 or a couple of shots to take her home. I've watched plenty of married and taken men completely wreck their relationships just trying to flirt with her at bars. Since leaving the business, she's done cash-only companion work, and she seems genuinely happy with her choices, so I support her. Honestly, if someone paid me $3,000 every weekend, plus free airfare and hotel, just to get bare, I'd probably be happy too. That said, she does wish she hadn't become so well known in the industry, if only so people would treat her with basic respect. Whether it's the judgmental religious folks, the relentless horny men, or the constant assumption that she's just easy, she deals with it all. On that note, a few years ago, my partner and I got a small taste of how differently people treat you when they know you've done corn. The objectification is immediate. People assume you're available simply because they've seen you on camera with someone else. To them, you're almost like an NPC in their personal fantasy. I can't even imagine what it must feel like to have an entire town view you that way. Story 7. She was an absolutely horrible person. She was my friend's girlfriend, and I didn't know her before I decided to join them on a holiday to Mexico. The first hour I spent with them, they got into a fight because she was forcing him to eat a croissant. From that point on, during our trip through Mexico and Cuba, she started multiple arguments a day, completely ruining my vacation. She was so bad that a local man in Havana actually recognized her the next day and told me he had seen her losing her temper earlier. In another Cuban city, she went off on a waitress because the restaurant didn't have something listed on the menu, which was pretty common in a poor country. The waitress didn't speak English, so she had no idea why the Cornstar was so upset. While the waitress was pouring water into our glasses, the Cornstar flipped her glass over, and water ended up spilling all over the table. It was incredibly embarrassing. I was furious. It got so bad that I gave my friend an ultimatum: dump her, or I'll travel alone. He ended up dumping her on New Year's Eve, and we had a decent night. But of course, he got back with her the very next day, and they stayed together for a couple more years before finally calling it quits. Right before they broke up, we went out to a club in our city. It was packed, and everyone was talking to strangers, smoking, drinking, and having a good time. My friend was having a casual chat with a woman, but the Cornstar wasn't having it. She stomped on this woman's foot with her high heels. What a lovely girl. Story 8. I know a girl who works as an exotic dancer and an OnlyFans model, and she makes an impressive amount of money. Some months, she pulls in $5,000 from OnlyFans alone. She's a decent person overall, but she struggles with a serious weed habit and some mental health issues. There's a difference between being attractive and being so attractive that men practically worship you the moment you step outside. I understand why she carries herself the way she does, but I can't help but wonder how much life will change for her once her youth starts to fade. Story 9. Back in 2010, I worked as a VJ at a nightclub in Vegas, where we hosted after-parties for the AVN Awards. The event was run by either Vivid or Wicked, I don't remember which, but they provided the video content for me to mix in with the usual nightclub visuals. Their footage was basically softcore, with a lot of macro shots of the performers leading up to nudity. About 30 minutes into the set, my GM comes into the booth and tells me someone has an issue with the videos. I turn around, and standing there with him is Phoenix Marie. But she wasn't complaining. She just wanted to see some content of herself. So, she stuck around while I sifted through the footage they sent. What was supposed to be a quick interaction turned into an hour or two of just the two of us talking. I gave her a rundown of the lights, video controls, and special effects, and eventually, we started discussing her career and how it played into her life. I'll tell you this, I've never met someone so professional and dedicated to their craft. At one point, she mentioned how some girls take on extra work while in Vegas for the awards. I, being completely naive, assumed she meant promo gigs, like brand ambassador jobs where attractive women stand around at booths. She quickly corrected me. No, extra work, as in escorting. Still not getting it. I asked, but what's the difference? Her response stuck with me. Once the camera is off, she's done performing. The act is over. I wish I had asked her real name because, in that moment, I felt like I was talking to her, the person behind the persona, while still recognizing the professionalism she brought to her work. It was a really cool experience. Story 10. I hung out with Lisa a few times in 2015, and we stayed in touch for a while. The level of attention she received everywhere we went was both amazing and intimidating. As a result, she was understandably guarded. I remember one time we were walking down the street in NYC, and a doorman spotted her from across the sidewalk, rushed over, and kissed her hand. It was honestly gross, and things like that happened often. Not always that extreme, but still, it was wild. She was always kind to me, and very savvy when it came to business. We had a nice, though brief, friendship. One thing I had to deal with was countless guys asking me if I slept with her. Many just assumed I did, or at least wanted to. They saw her as nothing more than an object, and I found that attitude immature and disrespectful. She's a human being, and we bonded over an unexpected baseball connection. Our time together was cool, and I genuinely hope our paths cross again someday. But who knows? It was a great experience while it lasted, and I wish her nothing but the best. Story 11. So, J.D. Sloan, the former Cornstar, lives in my town. After an injury in the army, he's now in a wheelchair. Over time, he's become one of those Canadians who supports Donald Trump and has fallen deep into Facebook conspiracy theories. He posts about crazy stuff like lasers in the sky causing tornadoes, anti-Islam rhetoric, and even bashes foods like pork and sushi, calling them dirty. He's gay but also claims to be Christian, and he's openly anti-Ukraine. Before politics took over his mindset, his attitude was already unbearable, constantly talking about himself with this unbearable overconfidence. I get that his life experiences must have shaped him into a person with a strong will, but the reality is that his situation, on the surface, might seem like one that deserves sympathy. He's even gone on the news to talk about overcoming adversity. But honestly, he's just a terrible person who's in a wheelchair. Recently, he's isolated himself after several people tried pointing out the lies in his posts. Whenever anyone challenges his wild views, he blocks them and runs away from any real conversation. In my experience, Most gay corn stars I've met tend to have inflated egos and a distorted sense of reality. There's another star in Vancouver who's had silicone injected into his dong. I've seen him posing in butch drag around the town and the Rockies. It's sad how body dysmorphia can drive someone to make these extreme choices. I suspect there's already a level of narcissism that comes with entering the corn industry, and that environment only fuels and normalizes it, creating an echo chamber where everyone around you is more concerned with your appearance than who you really are. It all ties into financial incentives based on looks. Story 12. I'll try not to get too detailed because I could easily turn this into a book. I'm just a regular guy who had one crazy encounter that completely blew my mind. It was 2003, and I was on a flight from Vegas to NYC. I had been there for a seminar with some coworkers, though I didn't attend for any particular reason other than to hang out and have a good time with my buddies. The flight home was solo, and I sat in the window seat, with a woman sitting next to me in the middle. I had no clue who she was at first. It wasn't until she casually mentioned her stage name that it clicked, and I didn't really understand the significance until I Googled her later and was absolutely mind-blown. Let me just say, she was very talkative and completely open about her career. As an introvert who didn't usually say much, I found it hard to keep up. But she was nudging me, making comments like, "Would you ever do it with that old lady over there? That's so hot. And what do you think of these?" while leaning into me. The conversation became pretty touchy-feely, and before long, things started happening under the little blue JetBlue blanket. She had no shame, no fear of consequences, and I had to really tone things down. To put it in perspective, I was just a regular 23-year-old guy, blue-collar, 5 feet 6 inches, athletic build, somewhat shy, and average-looking. I wasn't popular with women, had a few relationships and flings, always hoping for a good woman to come along. But there I was, in the middle of this crazy situation. That was just the beginning. We shared a cab from the airport to the city, and the next day, she came by my apartment. She was amazed by my humble place, which was above a parking garage, and shared with a coworker. She even offered to fly me back with her, saying, "How can I live like this?" and promised to give me blowy again if I came with her. I declined, but I kept in touch, and a couple of months later, I flew out to Vegas. Here I was again, an average guy, getting picked up at the airport by a Cornstar in an SL 500 convertible. Over the next few years, I made several trips to Vegas. My memory isn't perfect, but here are some standout moments, in no particular order. I was at her house, jumping off the roof into her beautiful pool. We went to casinos, dined at fancy restaurants, and even saw George Carlin live. One day, we rented a boat and cruised around Lake Mead. I was living it up. We went grocery shopping together, holding hands as we walked into the store. At one point, she accused me of checking out a blonde that drove by, threatening to have a groupie if I preferred a blonde over her. We had a meal at the Melting Pot, where I had to tell her to behave in public. I also met her mom, which was an experience in itself. She wanted to fulfill a fantasy by doing it in her childhood bedroom, but I respectfully declined. She jokingly said to her mom, "Thanks for C-blocking me," which made the situation awkward. I simply shrugged, and we changed the subject. One Thanksgiving, I baked a carrot cake in her kitchen to bring to a Cornstar friend's house for their dinner. It was the first time I missed Thanksgiving with my family. I also went with her to the doctor for a checkup on her implants, which had caused complications due to the number of surgeries she'd had. I distinctly remember the second opinion doctor suggesting she consider a reduction, to which she responded, "Do you know what I do for a living?" The doctor looked at me and said something like, "He should be supporting you." And I just shrugged, unsure how to respond. One Sunday, I had to bring her in for emergency surgery because the stitching on her implants had gotten infected. She was trying to convince me to do it with her in the bathroom while I helped her into her gown. I wasn't the greatest in those situations, but it did happen. After the surgery, she was irritable, yelling at the nurse, and making bizarre requests, like saying, "I need someone to F me." It was a lot to handle. The next morning, after helping her out with her recovery, she berated me with a string of nasty comments. I'd had enough. I went to pick up breakfast from a place called Egg and I, but as I was heading back, I booked a flight home. I dropped the food on the table, packed my things, and left. I hitched a ride from 2 guys who tried to sell me a fake watch, gave them some cash, and made it to the airport. I finally flew back home. I visited her a few more times after that, even bringing her to a friend's wedding. We stayed in touch for a while, but eventually, the crazy lifestyle started to feel like too much. I realized I didn't want that kind of life for myself. No drugs, no gambling, no STDs. I focused on my work, prospered, and eventually bought my first house. Years later, I met a good woman, and now we have a 7-year-old who loves playing Fortnite with me. Looking back, I'm grateful for not falling into that chaotic lifestyle, and I'm thankful for where I am now. Story 13. She's absolutely amazing, and I love her so much. She's doing really well for herself, making good money, and wisely saving for retirement while investing in real estate. Animals, especially guinea pigs, hold a special place in her heart. On top of all of that, she's a comedian in her spare time. She also dedicates her time to volunteering and works with nonprofits focused on issues like protecting worker girls, providing housing for children, and getting menstrual products to those who need them. She's involved with organizations like Food Not Bombs and participates in various food programs. I'm about 7 years older than her, and I've had the privilege of watching her grow into the incredible woman she is today. Yes, the industry she works in comes with its own set of challenges, but she's incredibly professional and knows exactly how to advocate for herself. She's figured out how to make a system that's designed to make her fail work in her favor. I truly want to see her achieve all of her dreams. We need her in our community. She's a natural-born leader. Story 14. I dated one for a while, but it was hard to tell if her sounds during intimate times were genuine or just part of her routine. She was very clingy and wanted to move way too fast. One time, she lost it because I wasn't ready to move halfway across the country and do cam work all day. She ended up leaving her son with her mom so she could travel and stay high. Every now and then, she reaches out, but the conversation usually ends with her getting upset with me for breaking up with her 14 years ago. I'll admit, I miss those big jugs, but everything else that came with the relationship? No thanks. Story 15. I know 2 people personally who are former stars now. I met both of them back in the late 90s, long before platforms like OnlyFans made the industry more mainstream, and when corn was still a dedicated profession. One of them is my best friend's mom. I met my friend in high school, and I spent so much time at their house that she became like a second mom to me. She kept her job well hidden, even from her own children. She was always super nice and was considered the cool mom because she let her kids do pretty much anything they wanted, but the truth was, she was often a bit absent. The boys in the neighborhood would constantly make comments like, "Your mom is so hot," and other things like that, which made it awkward. This was still the early days of the internet, so content wasn't as easily accessible, but eventually, someone found one of her videos and spread it around, including to my friend and his brother. I'm not sure if they ever confronted her about it, and I never let on that I knew about it. She's still incredibly sweet, though. She ended up marrying an older man and got really involved in the church. The other person, though, she's had a rough time ever since she got involved in corn. She was my boss's wife at my first job. When we first met, she was really cool, and we got along well since she was closer to my age than she was to my boss. She was, at the time, by far the most attractive woman I had ever met. She ended up cheating with my best friend's mom's boyfriend, the one mentioned above, and he introduced her to corn. Over time, I heard through the grapevine that she'd fallen into a heavy addiction, tried to off herself unsuccessfully, and spent time in a psych ward. About 5 years ago, she added me on Facebook and shared the mess of her life, all the struggles of being an addict and trying to keep custody of her daughter. Then she tried to ask me for money for a car or wanted to stay with me and bring her daughter along, but that was a hard pass. After that, it was pretty silent until a couple of months ago when someone we both knew over 20 years ago reached out to let me know her daughter had OD and passed away. Story 16. My boss was friends with a local gay corn producer, and if any of the actors wanted extra work, he'd offer them a day job. I made a few friends through that and ended up going to a lot of their pool parties and events. A lot of them were just regular, good-looking guys, super friendly, and genuinely nice. Most of them had moved to SoCal from out of state, tried out the industry, made some money, and moved on to live normal lives. The ones who made careers out of it, though, were a bit more unstable personally. They were difficult to work with, hard to talk to, sometimes inappropriate, and even rude to customers. Some had obvious drug problems, and they were all hooking up with each other. There was one guy, a career actor, stage name Kyle Ross, who would occasionally pop up on my personal feedback when Tumblr was still a thing. When I told him about it, he was really excited. He wanted to make a name for himself in the industry and was stoked about the exposure. He was nice to me, but I didn't like him because he had some racist tendencies. He came across as a thrill seeker, always moving, always looking for the next big thing. He had a Corvette, liked jet skiing, and had this manic energy about him, kind of like someone on coke. I once rode in a car with him, and he was speeding and driving recklessly. When I asked him why part of his car interior was broken, he casually said it was because he'd gotten into a physical fight with his boyfriend, also in the industry, while driving. He died in a car accident at 29. Story 17. A few years ago, I accidentally stumbled upon a corn clip, and the guy in it was doing it with a red-haired girl who looked oddly familiar. Wait a second, that's my colleague who sits across from me every day at work. Now that's a bit awkward. The next day at the office, my colleague noticed a strange vibe and, after a few hours, casually asked, "Did you find me online somewhere?" I just replied, "Yep, the redhead is a stunner." We shared a brief laugh, and the conversation that followed was surprisingly entertaining. He then invited me to a shoot he was working on, where he was also a director, but not as an actor. A few days later, I found myself standing next to the cameraman, chatting with the actresses, snacking, and watching the shoot unfold. It was definitely interesting. But in the end, it just made me realize that it's really just a job like any other, just with a different kind of performance. What I still remember most vividly, though, is the smell, a strange mix of fluids, perfume, cleaning products, cigarette smoke, coffee, and stale beer. Story 18. I knew Ron Jeremy. We shared a tenant who was always behind on rent, so eventually, we ended up talking all the time over the phone about him. On the phone, Ron was very professional, kind, funny, and cool. He had a ton of stories from the film industry, and it was always fun to hear from him. No joke, the first time we talked, we chatted for over 4 hours. I really got the feeling that, despite all the attention he got for being a star, underneath it all, he was just a lonely guy. We didn't meet in person until about 15 years later when he called to tell me he was coming to NYC as a guest at a comedy club. He was still cool, but he was very drunk and looked old and tired. And honestly, during the 4 hours I was there, he had did it with 2 women in the bathroom. There were other women throwing themselves at him and doing all sorts of things just to get a photo with him. He was still friendly, but our conversation kept getting interrupted by the women. The thing is, none of them were particularly attractive, just dumpy and looking for attention. While he was friendly to me, I got uncomfortable with how he treated all the women. But, honestly, none of them seemed to mind. He was the guest of honor, the star, and they were all eager to be part of it. It was funny sometimes, but uncomfortable other times as he didn't hold back on the lewd behavior. But again, the women didn't complain. They were stepping up to be part of the scene. And none of them were paid to be there. They were just guests like me. Fast forward 5 years, and the news hit about all the SA lawsuits against him, which didn't surprise me. I'm mixed about it, because, yes, his behavior made me uncomfortable, and I'm a guy, but I also saw a lot of women eager to let him treat them that way. There was literally a line of 30 women waiting for their turn to make out with him. But those lawsuits? I'm not sure if they were from events like the one I witnessed. Who knows what really happened? I do miss telling people that Ron Jeremy used to call me all the time and that we were friends, and I missed the funny conversations we had. But meeting him in person was kind of strange. It's one thing to see a star perform on video, but totally different seeing them act like that in real life. It definitely made me uncomfortable. Apparently, he escaped the lawsuits by claiming insanity and now lives in an asylum. News reports say he's not doing well. So yeah, that's my Cornstar story. Story 19. I know Sky Lopez personally, though that's not her real name or the one I used to call her. She lives in my town, and at one point, I worked for her when she managed a kids' clothing store. I also went to school with her oldest son, helped her move out of one of her houses, and she even officiated my cousin's wedding. She's an incredibly sweet person and genuinely cool to be around. As far as I know, she doesn't do corn anymore, though she may have an OnlyFans. I don't keep tabs on her. Aside from her past as an ex-Cornstar, she's a jack of all trades. She works in construction, operating heavy equipment as her day job. She's a 20 out of 10 person and really funny, too. Story 20. I went to high school with a very popular and well-known star. She was only at my school for 2 years, but we've stayed Facebook friends all this time. I still browse Facebook out of habit, and she, for whatever reason, has always been pretty active on that platform. I think she views it as an outlet where she can be her true self and post whatever she wants away from the public eye. She's honestly a really cool person. Hilarious, too. Over the years, we've had a few brief exchanges on various topics, and it's actually wild how similar she is today as a seasoned Cornstar to who she was as a rambunctious high school grad. We're far from being close friends, though, just internet acquaintances. She's publicly spoken out a few times about how difficult and dehumanizing the industry can be. I don't think her personal Facebook has much industry reach, so she may have been venting into the void a bit, but that perspective has always stuck with me. It seems like she's made it out of the corn industry, but I'd be fascinated to hear more about her true lived experience. To sum up, went to high school with, and am longtime Facebook friends with, a big-name Cornstar. She's a human being with incredible depth beyond the public persona. I have a lot of respect for the worker girls. Story 21. We have a couple in our friend group who work in adult films and also have OnlyFans accounts, plus they've been on TV shows. They're just regular, fun people, and their job doesn't make things weird at all. We hang out like we do with anyone else, playing games like COD, Zombies, and Rocket League, going out for dinner, or doing activities like go-karting and bowling. There's the usual lighthearted teasing, and they joke about their profession too. For example, at the go-kart track, the marshal looked about 20, and after the races, she asked him, "Do you have a girlfriend?" "No." "Well, thanks for the fun. Consider this a tip," and lifted her shirt and flashed us, joking with him. Another time, they asked a single guy if he wanted to be a Lucky fan in one of their videos, just for the intro part. We've got some playful banter, especially because I used to hack corn sites when I was into hacking. I joked, "If you want our content, just say so, no need to hack, friends can watch for free." Or, as an SME, any tips for scenarios? She'll joke back, saying things like, "You can watch, but you have to hold the camera," and her husband adds, "I'll try to aim away from you. Cross my heart," to which I responded, "Judging by your COD headshot count, I don't like the odds of that." She also admires my girlfriend's natural chesticle job and even asked her for advice on hers. I caught them in the kitchen once, feeling each other's jugs while my girlfriend gave her tips about how implants are tax-deductible as a business expense. My girlfriend is pretty prude but respects how open they are about their bodies. Other than all that, we don't judge or shame them at all. They have kids and get flack from other parents, though how would they know? They're careful about keeping things from their kids for now, but they plan to have the conversation with them when they're older. They appreciate that we treat them just like anyone else and don't make things weird or focus on their work. Story 22. My ex's friend used to work in the adult industry. He once dated Janine, the nurse on the cover of the Blink-182 album, and was friends with Lisa and, the famous Who's Nailin' Palin actress. I've been to both of their houses. Janine seemed pretty normal, and she had long-haired chihuahuas. I remember she was a Dallas Cowboys fan. Lisa and was super sweet. One time, she threw a party at her house with a bunch of people from the adult film industry and behind-the-scenes crew. It was wild hearing people talk about fluffing, enemas, and other adult topics as casually as you'd hear about office gossip. Some of the younger girls there made the whole thing feel a bit uncomfortable. Lisa and once invited us to watch her perform as Sarah Palin. I felt a little weird about it because I had interacted with her in more regular social settings. During her performance, she encouraged us to sit close to the floor and, at one point, asked us to pull a rolled, autographed photo of her from downtown area using just our mouths. I was too embarrassed to do it that way, so I used my hand. She then grabbed my head and shoved it in her chest. I didn't know how to react, but looking back, it's kind of funny. Aside from that, I don't remember many other interactions with them, but both seemed like nice people with their own joys and struggles, just like anyone else. Story 23. She's a sweet lady, but unfortunately, she's been ostracized by her neighbors. She chose to buy a house in a wealthy, gated community with 24/7 security, but it's one of those neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone. So they knew who she was and what she did before her moving trucks even showed up. She's the youngest person in the neighborhood and the only single female homeowner. All the husbands around her do favors for her, like mowing the lawn and raking leaves, which has caused the wives to resent her, even though she's never reciprocated the guy's attention. She's the type of friendly, southern woman who will wave and say hi to anyone who drives up her street if she's outside. It's kind of sad how nice she is, even though she's generally ignored. In reality, though, she's known to be quite the party girl and brings guys home often. She's not my neighbor, but she's my aunt's. Story 24. I had a hairstylist who was a former adult film actress, and she told me her mission in life was to help clients go blonde as safely as possible. Apparently, she worked with a company that demanded she make too many quick changes to her hair, and then it all fried off, and she had to shave her head. So, she was so cautious and really great at researching new methods. My hair looked so good when she was my stylist. Story 25. My former barber used to be a Cornstar. He was B-tier, so not a big name, but easy to find. He was a really nice, friendly guy who seemed keen to make friends because he invited me to one of his regular group seen the first time I met him. I didn't go. Months later, he invited me to his 30th birthday party, a normal party, and most of the guests were his clients. I got the sense he was quite lonely. Story 26. I used to live in a loft in downtown LA. My neighbor was a Cornstar who also produced corn. She was a pretty regular lady other than her fake chest and her fake Fran Drescher laugh. She held a big movie release party and invited me. I thought it was going to be the best party in my life, but it was really creepy with lots of gross guys and girls with too much makeup wearing very little. It was actually worse than it sounds. Edit. I hope nobody thinks I was bashing on this woman. While the party was seedy, she was anything but. She was always very nice to me, very kind and neighborly. We weren't close enough to be considered friends, but we were on a first-name basis, and she was always very polite and sweet. Story 27. Rachel Starr is fun, funny, and you would probably walk right past her in public. Totally normal. She helped me move into my new apartment once. Paid her $200. And then she left. No corn story. We're still friends. Story 28. About 15 years ago, I managed a jiu-jitsu gym. Rachel Starr called me and asked questions about the program. Later that day, she came in, and I showed her a few basic moves as an intro to jiu-jitsu. This occurred about an hour or so before the regular class started. A few guys showed up to the training early and had questions why the gym manager, me, was showing Rachel Starr jiu-jitsu. Story 29. She's older, kind of popular in the early 2000s. She is an emotional mess with severe issues and threatens to off herself every time her husband wants to divorce her. Aside from that, she's kind of nice. I'm on friendly terms with her. I try not to talk to her or spend much time around her, though. Story 30. I met a guy once who directed a friend's music video. We were hanging at the studio, talking local punk rock crap. What's the hardest pit you've been in? I distinctly remember he said, you won't believe it, but 311. Thought I made another bass player friend and followed each other on socials. Then one day I see him post a link, like, hey, check out this podcast I did interview with adult film star Chad, not my government name. And I looked up that name on Cornhub like, that's my buddy Chad plowing some babes. He has a monster dong. Cool guy, though I still bump into him once in a while. Story 31. A really outgoing alt girl would shop all the time at my store. We'd chit-chat, and the topic of what she does came up. She initially said streaming, but over time she said she was a cam model when I asked how she could afford her house so young. She's since moved to another state with better tax laws for her work, but she still occasionally is in town to visit family. I say hi occasionally over Instagram nowadays, but I haven't seen her since before COVID. Story 32. I dated an exotic dancer for a little bit. She came into my store. She was cute, but she wasn't dressed for work, anything like that. I was incredibly shy, so the fact that I hit on her was mind-blowing. The fact that she came back and gave me her number was more mind-blowing. We were just shooting the crap about computer parts. She bought something for a guy that, adjusted for inflation, would be about $500 today. I said something like, man, I wish I had hot women buying me computer parts. Then she paid with a bunch of cash. I didn't even clock it at the time. On our first date, she's like, so you know I paid in cash, right? Then she explained why. She was a nice girl, to me, most of the time, but not to others, and as time went on, she just became a walking red flag. I've seen her a couple of times in the last few years or so. One time she came into my work, no idea how she found me, and tried to recruit me to her current job and kind of hit on me, as I was wearing a wedding ring. The other time I was walking downtown. She's still pretty, but if I want a woman to be mean to me, I can just not feed my wife for a few hours. I don't need to start back up with that chick. Story 33. Back in the 2000s, I worked the door at a trendy bar in Hollywood. A guy came outside to smoke. He told me his friends brought him out for drinks to try and cheer him up because his girlfriend of 7 years left him 10 days ago. He said there was some really hot blonde girl at the bar that was all over him, but he wasn't into it. He still missed his girlfriend. A little bit later, I met the hot blonde and her friend. She actually said, "What's wrong with guys in Hollywood? Do I look ugly to you?" I was just talking to this guy inside, and he turned me down. What exactly do I have to do? It was Jenna Jameson. Story 34. Just a typical girl that liked to chill. She'd work hard for a couple months, make about 30K, then take a few months off. Rinse and repeat. She didn't really spend extravagantly, just smoked weed and watched a lot of movies. She didn't flaunt her job, but wasn't afraid to talk about it either. This was like 20 years ago. I wonder what's become of her. Story 35. Peter North used to come into where I worked. He was super nice, was really into performance German cars. I was with my girlfriend at a car wash once and ran into him and chatted for a bit. Trying to explain who he was a bit awkward. Story 36. I babysat for her kids. Honestly, I didn't know when I started. I thought she was just a voluptuous pretty white lady with some really neglected kids. Then one weekend she disappeared to Miami and left me with her kids without prior agreement, but paid me $3,000, so I just let go and never babysat for her again. She followed me on Instagram a little while later, and I discovered that she was a Cornstar that only did black men group bangs. I honestly just really feel sorry for her kids. They were good kids, just in a tough situation. Someday, one of that boy's friends will find their mom on Cornhub and destroy his life. Story 37. A friend was staying with friends, and one was a minor Cornstar. She was really hard to put up with. Her boyfriend had to throw out his playboys, but she was allowed to cheat, only if it was another girl. She would flaunt her money, leave cash around, and accuse anyone of stealing if she misplaced it. She had a price that she could be bought for. She'd sleep with someone for $10,000 and would leave her boyfriend for $100,000. That was 30 years ago, and I guess they are still together and married. Story 38. She's gone down a rabbit hole since COVID. One of my best friends for years, but I watched her go from outgoing, approachable, and sociable to being radicalized from her isolation, being terminally online, and her experiences from and adult films. I miss my old friend. I can barely talk to her now without her going on about Michelle Obama being a man or the demons of the New World Order. Story 39. I have a Cornstar, one featured in a documentary, in my yoga class. She sometimes goes along with the class, but more often does her own thing, which is a bit disrespectful, but whatever. She's quite an accomplished yogi. The only thing of note is that, due to the enormity of her implants, she is unable to do a handstand. She mostly keeps to herself. Story 40. I'll keep this intentionally vague to respect privacy, but a woman in our university cohort was discovered to have had a career in adult entertainment before starting her studies. A guy happened to come across her videos online. This was before OnlyFans, so more in the realm of traditional adult film work. She seemed like a regular student who kept a low profile, often wearing a baseball cap, sitting at the front of the lecture hall, and mostly interacting with mature-age students. As far as I know, the discovery remained relatively quiet among students, though I doubt the administration would have been pleased if it had come to their attention. Story 41. I used to be friends with Mr. Pete when he lived in LA. We met at the local gym, and I had no clue he was a male star until some friends clued me in. He was genuinely one of the nicest, most down-to-earth guys, just really pleasant to be around. We got close enough that he'd invite me to BBQs and other gatherings. Typically, guys in that scene can be jocks, and while some are nice, most aren't. But he was different, a total teddy bear of a guy that everyone loved. Story 42. She was a genuinely caring woman. She got into the adult industry after a breakup, but left about a year later when she and her boyfriend got back together. She shared plenty of stories about the women she worked with, but she wasn't fond of the men. Many were too aggressive, and some would try to accidentally push boundaries, like attempting things without consent. After leaving Corn, she transitioned into camming, fully clothed, just talking to guys. It turned out to be incredibly lucrative, though not in the way you'd expect. Instead of direct payments, many men showered her with expensive gifts through Amazon. She once told me about an older guy she regularly talked to while camming, and one time, her cat wandered into the frame. The next thing she knew, He had bought her an elaborate cat tree, one so massive it barely fit in her apartment. Another guy had a thing for shoes and would send her a new pair every month, even though she only ever wore them for his requests. She found it amusing, but in the end, it was easy money. Story 43. I went to college with someone who was in the adult industry. We had all our classes together, studied in the same groups, and hung out almost every day. She was even at my wedding. She was incredibly quiet and reserved, the complete opposite of what I would have expected from a Cornstar. You never would have guessed. Funny enough, I didn't find out about her career until after we graduated. The world is wild like that. Edit. Just to clarify, she was an actual star, long before OnlyFans was a thing. She also did magazine shoots. Story 44. My next-door neighbor was Abby Lee Brazil. We also went to the same high school and were friends for a while, but we drifted apart when she started hanging out with the wrong crowd. A few years later, I was casually browsing Corn and unexpectedly came across one of her videos. I couldn't believe it. As for my own experience, my ex-wife was a webcam model in Colombia. I managed to smooth talk my way into getting her number, and we started talking outside of the website. Eventually, I flew to Colombia to meet her in person, lost my virginity to her, and we ended up getting married for 5 years. That all came crashing down, though. She cheated on me and left me the same day she got her U.S. citizenship. That was an experience. Story 45. I dated a woman who started off as an exotic dancer, then dove into OnlyFans and camming during the pandemic. After that, she worked in small, local studio Corn, eventually moving to bigger studios, and even opened her own studio with some friends from the industry. For the most part, things were great. We had a lot in common, and it was much better to be stuck at home with someone than be alone. We took long walks, played PS4, and had Lord of the Rings marathons. It was a lot of fun. At first, I felt a bit jealous about her work, but she was very open and clear with me that it was just a job, which helped me come to terms with it. Eventually, though, the relationship ran its course. Story 46. I know a few people who are cam girls or have OnlyFans accounts, and I feel like that's not really the same as official Corn. They're just regular people, and you'd never guess they were involved in the industry. I went to high school with a girl who worked for Bang Brothers for a few years. After her videos came out, I never saw her again, but she was just a regular person in high school. I also went to college with someone who used to do security for West Coast Productions. He had some crazy stories about bear fights on set and stuff like that. He mostly talked about how many of the women at shoots back then were often on drugs and alcohol. He said they had to delay shoots a lot because the women looked too messed up on camera. Story 47. I found out years into a close friendship that my friend had a 2-year stint in the adult industry. I had gotten her a job at my company, and one day, some coworkers randomly mentioned her old stage name and insisted I look it up. I didn't want to, but they kept pushing, so I eventually caved. When I looked it up, I was shocked. Not because it changed how I saw her, but because she'd never mentioned it, despite us being really close. She used to talk a lot about her amazing intimate life while venting about her fiancé, but I never would have guessed. When I brought it up, she got really uncomfortable, and our friendship slowly faded after that. I think she assumed I'd judge her for it, but honestly, it didn't surprise me that much. My plan was to bring it up once and never mention it again, but she clearly felt differently. I think she wanted to leave that chapter behind, but given her involvement in major productions, it's out there forever. Her fiancé at the time clearly had a hard time with it. He ended up marrying someone else just 6 months after they broke up. These days, she's really into astrology and church. We're not as close anymore, but I still think she's a great person. Story 48. She's this really sweet mousy girl around 5 feet 4 inches who took all the music and drama classes she could in high school with big dreams. You'd probably classify her as hipster, and her favorite movie is The Big Lebowski. Being a shy little nerd girl, her mom wanted her to do something in the summertime, so she signed her up for summer programs such as one year being a camp counselor for children who were abused or neglected. When she was 17, however, she was at another program, forgot which, and she met some guys who introduced her to meth, and she was immediately hooked. To everyone else, she was still the shy, quiet kid, but she was starting to become more adventurous and selling love. We also believe she carried out an affair with her English teacher at this time. Flash forward to when she's 19, and she starts doing Corn to the shock of everyone. One of her DVDs also co-starred Nautica Thorne. so she was starting to become pretty big. She kept going around to shows and band performances in the local scene, and everyone knew and made her very uncomfortable for it. She got out of Corn after only a year's time, with her boyfriend at the time encouraging her to leave and with her addiction getting pretty severe. Then she was low-key a cash-only companion for years until she eventually got off her addiction. Then she got a degree to become a wine expert. Married the guy she ditched at 13-14, and they have a 2-year-old now. She even showed up to her school's 20-year high school reunion and was embraced by everyone, as far as I can tell. If you talked to her or interacted with her, you'd never guess. I strongly suspect she's on the autism spectrum since everyone notes how shy and reserved she is, but she also doesn't have the ability to map other people's minds well, does whatever she wants to do, and has a kind of nihilistic approach to everything. The tragedy of her life is that she wanted to make it in Hollywood and become famous, and she was in fact auditioning for real roles while doing Corn. I think if she hadn't got hooked on drugs, she'd have gotten a good career. Physically, she's a bit like Michelle Trachtenberg. Story 49. My gay nephew is a well-known star down in Florida, and he's gained quite a bit of popularity. But I honestly can't bring myself to watch any of his videos or look at his pictures. I'm gay too. It just weirds me out. I remember when he was born, and when I first stumbled upon his work, it definitely threw me off a bit. Not literally, of course. It still does to some extent. And it's the one thing we never talk about, either with each other or with the rest of the family. It's uncomfortable for him to think about his uncle watching his scenes, and honestly, it weirds me out too. My brother once asked me if I knew about his Corn career and if I'd seen any of his work. I lied and said no. But even with all that, I'm still proud of him. It is a legitimate work, and if he's able to make extra money doing something he enjoys, more power to him. He's also a hairstylist, so he's balancing both. Story 50. I actually know 2 women in the industry. One has a degree in psychology, and the other in English literature. They're both really kind and down-to-earth. One of them is a bit wild and really enjoys her work. The other is more focused on the money and sees it as a way to earn extra cash. I think the English lit girl will eventually move on from it. It doesn't really align with her long-term goals or lifestyle, but for now, it's helping her out financially. The psychology girl, on the other hand, has made a career out of it. She actually owns a dungeon where she works as a mistress and even has her own security team. I don't see her much since she moved to London, but I still check in with her around her birthday each year. She seems really happy, and she always has crazy stories to share about her clients. Story 51. I used to have an employee who was a gym enthusiast. He was a genuinely nice guy, good at his job, but the drama that came with working with a lot of young women was a regular issue. Nearly every week, I'd have to step in because he'd been involved with one of them, and then jealousy would stir up, leading to shouting matches or occasional catfights. Despite being married, he seemed to get through about half of the workforce during his time with us. It was easy to see why. He looked great, had a fantastic body, and a laid-back, easygoing personality. He never had to try hard, and from what I could tell, his wife didn't seem too upset about his extracurricular activities, or at least, we never saw any issues from her. One day, he handed me his resignation and told me that he'd been doing gay corn shoots on the weekends. Apparently, the offers had been pouring in, and he could make 5 or 10 times more doing that for just 1 day a week than he could working with us. I had to respect his decision. From what I understand, he's done really well for himself in the years since. I did try to look him up, but knowing his real name didn't exactly help me track down his Corn alias. Story 52. I wasn't really friends with Asia Carrera, but I knew her casually through a web-based group we were both part of in the late 90s called Enid. She was very down-to-earth, super smart, and funny. She has kids, and her daughter has done exceptionally well in her studies. After I left Twitter and Facebook, I didn't have much of a reason to keep in touch, but my wife and a few mutual friends still do. At a book release party, I met Liera Rue, who was there to support the author. It was a small gathering, but my wife, Liera, the author, Samantha Cole, and I spent a nice half-hour chatting about the book, the industry, and especially what it was like before the 2000s. Liera was lovely, though I'm still fake salty because I never got my book signed. The real people you don't want to know are the male producers. The casting couch types, real assholes, honestly. The worst of the worst, in my opinion, are the casting couch guys who are shorter than 5 feet 7 inches with Guy Fieri hair. Story 53. My perspective might be a bit different since I live in Japan, where most of the ones I've met or known are retired or not very active in the industry. One thing that remains consistent is that they're just regular people. It's simply a job to them. They're not obsessed or anything, but they do tend to be more open and direct about those topics in conversation. The biggest downside I've noticed is that many of them love to drink, sometimes to an unhealthy degree. For anyone who meets them, my advice is to avoid bombarding them with questions. If they want to talk about their work, they will. But if you fixate on their job and do nothing but ask questions, they'll probably answer out of politeness, but won't be interested in forming a real friendship or continuing the conversation for long. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.